Everybody's chatting about the Providence mayoral race, so why don't we? We predicted it would be the thing that sucks the oxygen out of the room, and it certainly has in this 2014 political season. And you know, I've been dabbling with my own thoughts about what's been going on each and every night, but since the televised debate last week on Fox Providence, I really haven't had a chance to kind of break it down because we schedule guests, we've got commitments and everything else. So we kind of parked this Monday night to kind of get after it, and so we're going to eliminate the rundown this evening, so I don't have to touch base on 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 issues. We will include your state of mind at the end, of course. But Dan McGowan is my guest from WPRI.com, and he's really good at kind of following my crazy train of thought and trying to tackle these issues. So here's the polling data that began everyone's what factor in this race, and I don't know why anybody would be surprised by this number because it kind of makes all sorts of sense. This is not new information. This is a couple, 3 weeks old now. The WPRI poll where Buddy Cianci led Jorge Elorza, the Democratic primary winner, by 6 points, 38-32. Dan Harrop, the Republican, who has been, to his credit, has made more news with a 6% following than most 6%ers do, and of course the 21% undecided, which is where the whole race will be won or lost. My friend, good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Thanks for coming in again.
Sure.
What I want to do here tonight is kind of tackle the conversation in a bunch of different parts. I do want to talk about the polling data again and what it meant then and what it might mean now. And then I want to kind of talk about the debate the other night, which you know, you and I sat next to each other and we watched it right from the first row with sore necks looking up to the stage and watching the whole thing go on. The public safety issue, which is so important to the folks in the city, is something I want to spend some specific time on. And then this Dan Harrop's flap that is kind of semi-gummed up the race a little bit, maybe not. I'll get your take on it. And then we'll talk about the failed Buddy Cianci super PAC. At least Dan's reporting indicates that it might be failed. Then we'll talk about the Providence Journal's role in this entire race, because they certainly have an editorial axe to grind, no doubt. So that's kind of where I want to be with this, and you can react on your state of mind. We'll hear what you think about it tomorrow, and of course every day on the radio from noon to 3 on WPRO we have a chance to kind of chat it up. Gut check overview, what you think. We've already talked about the polling data in the past, so what would your gut say those numbers are moving or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're moving as more money gets spent. So certainly Buddy continues to be on the air. Jorge Elorza is making a push to go on the air. I think you're starting to see numbers probably move. You're really seeing both candidates, the leading candidates, Buddy Cianci and Jorge Elorza, really make an effort on the south side. They think that's where the numbers are going to move the most. They think that the east side is pretty much locked up for Jorge Elorza. The north end of the city is locked up for Buddy Cianci. So now it's a race for the south side.
See, that's interesting, because when I was in attendance at the same very lengthy press conference that Buddy Cianci had at the park, the Billy Taylor Park,
side, yeah.
with respect to Billy. I mean, there was this conversation that went on there that I thought was fascinating. From what is considered to be the middle and lower class East Siders, sure, who, a handful of them at least, showed up to Buddy's thing and were supporting or testing his waters on some issues. I talked to a woman who I've had on this television show and on the radio show about busing, who I believe spoke at the press conference or asked a question of Buddy. But I pulled her aside, asked her to step aside, of course, the other day, and just try to get a pulse. And she was telling me that there is a very, very big divide that she sees growing between what would be considered to be the middle and working class East Siders and the East Side elite, who I'm sure, you are correct, are Jorge Elorza supporters. Yeah. But that Jorge has not performed well in a lot of the community gatherings that they have had, has been empty answered when it comes to digging past a conceptual topic. That Buddy has been on the street, you know, really, and you know him, if there's a policy conversation that he can't spend 10 hours on repeating himself over, then I don't know.
I don't think there is one, yeah.
Right?
Well,
so I'm sorry, I'm long-winded, but talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I think you're right. I think one of the things that Buddy Cianci is really trying to do is lock up any amount of vote that he can on the east side. The key is that Mount Hope neighborhood, right? That where Councilman Jackson, who's his co-chairman, is the council member over there. It's a fairly strong African American community where Buddy's always been very strong. I think Buddy knows that he cannot go, to the east side and get beat by 5,000 votes in this race. He won't be able to make it up the rest of the city. This is one
amount
opening.
of votes we expect is what? The total amount of votes?
It'll probably be somewhere around 34,000 votes. Could be upwards of 35. So in that range, and we're talking.
And the east side has how much of that?
About a third, maybe a little less than a third of the vote there. So
Big
it's
chunk.
a big chunk, and if you get beat, like I said, 5,000 votes there, it is very difficult to make up the rest of the city.
But do you feel the vibe that I'm beginning to feel that there's a class divide there, and there's a little bit of, and we'll come back to this when we talk about the super PAC that is now seemingly blowing up, but that there's a little bit of debate and contentiousness inside what would be considered the east side.
Sure, and again, it's just that I think in
Mount
a lot of
Hope
ways
area.
it's that one pocket. The big number of votes come from the other parts of the east side, the real wealthy parts of the east side, and so like I said, Buddy Cianci is going to need to really do well in that third ward, that Mount Hope neighborhood.
All right, we'll come back to what the super PAC is doing, because I think that's probably very germane to what the whole east side vote thing. There's a lot of huffing and puffing, and it didn't pan out. But we'll get to it. In fact, why don't we do this? Let's stay with this. Let's do one more of these conversations before we pause. The debate itself. What was your take on the debate?
I thought that this is a sort of a lukewarm response here. It wasn't all that exciting. I thought Buddy Cianci held his own. He certainly commanded had a commanding presence on the stage. But Jorge Elorza, by no means did he screw up in any way. I thought he was fairly strong. I don't know that it moved. We were talking about those 21% of undecided voters. Do I think last Tuesday night moved voters in any way? Probably not. I think people who liked Jorge were very impressed with him. People who liked Buddy Cianci, of course, were very impressed with Buddy Cianci. Maybe Dan Harrop may have been the most interesting because he was the one with the one-liners. He was kind of fun.
And I wonder if he picked up a couple points here, there, everywhere.
Well, and he's in every percentage point that he picks up, it makes it makes the ceiling lower for a Buddy Cianci or for Jorge Elorza. We don't know where those votes come from, but if he ends up 8% of the vote, that's a big change in the way this election is going to play out.
Well, here's Laura. Can we play at least part of the squabble that existed between Buddy Cianci and Jorge Elorza during the debate?
A big difference as to how that port should be developed. We now have scrap yards and strip clubs there that the people who are supporting him put there.
All right.
That's number one.
That's a 30
I'm
seconds.
not
All
so
the
sure
people-
that's the case.
Oh, yeah, yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Mr.
because-
Harrop, I want to bring
can't
you
just
into
make
this.
things up, buddy.
I'm
We're not
making
going to
things
let you
up.
get away.
Isn't Mayor
You can
Tavares and
speak,
Anthony,
buddy,
and
but
isn't
you
Mr.
can't
Solomon
lie.
on your
We're
side?
not going
He's
to
the one
let
that
you
passed
lie.
the ordinance to put
No
scrap
lying
metal
for
down
vote.
there.
Thank you.
Isn't he supporting you?
Thank you.
Let me just.
Isn't Mayor Tavares supporting you? He
Mr.
let it happen.
Cianci,
We're not going to let you lie tonight, buddy. That's not a debating topic. It's a debating tool.
Right. Well, he pulled that right from the Providence Journal, right? That was one of their editorial headlines. That was definitely a tactic to kind of get him, maybe put Buddy Cianci sort of on tilt a little, if you will, and kind of fire back, and that's how it got a little ugly right there.
I'm not sure it was very effective.
Yeah, I mean, Buddy Cianci's been knocked back before. He's been there before, so he knows how to handle a debate where somebody's attacking him. I don't know that Jorge Elorza or Dan Harrop really have those abilities yet, right? They're new politicians.
But I thought the waterfront conversation was interesting in that Buddy seems to have a more specific line of either credible plan or malarkey, but he seems to have a more credible line in terms of what he wants to do at the port. And Jorge Elorza is less definitive about what he wants to do there.
This is one of the very few places where these guys are completely different. Buddy Cianci wants mixed use on the port. He wants to see hotels potentially. He wants to see the city utilize that port as a tourist destination. Jorge Lorza, he thinks that this is where the jobs come from, industrial use. He wants to double exports.
But he can't dig in on what kinds of use.
Right.
Exports, and Buddy kind of nailed them.
Right.
Export what? Used cars? Well, used cars are about. He's consistently conceptual. Jorge Lorza so far to me seems like he has been horizontal. Lots of concepts, lots of conversations on lots of different areas of concern, but he's not very vertical. He doesn't seem to be able to go very deep on any one of those concepts. And the ports seem to be the same thing.
Yeah, I mean the port is the one place where he's kind of centered his any idea for job creation that he has. The port is the one that he says, this is my big plan. The thing is, it's essentially status quo, except grow what is currently there, right? He's okay with the idea of a scrapyard there because that creates jobs and does generate tax revenue. So he's just it's a philosophical difference in a lot of ways.
And it's funny because Buddy Cianci has a press conference tomorrow down at the port, and I'm guessing we're going to see renderings.
Beautiful renderings, I'm sure.
San Antonio, Texas type riverfront,
yeah.
which may grab people's attention. All right, we'll come back, we'll talk about what Dan Harrop means in this race and the antagonism that's developed between he and Buddy Cianci. Stay with us. Welcome back. A must read every day and multiple times a day is WPRI.com, and Dan McGowan's reporting, and Dan is good at a lot of stuff, but he's really been focusing on the city of Providence, so he's kind of like my right-hand guy to go to talk about some of the nuances of this race, and we've been discussing the race. Let's talk about Buddy Cianci and, well, actually, let's first talk about the public safety thing here, because this is another part where I think these guys have at least separated. They both want 100 cops added, but how they get there, this is Jorge Lorza at a press conference we both attended last week.
The only way we're going to get out of the mess that we're in at City Hall is by creating jobs and growing the tax base. The most important responsibility that any mayor has is keeping the residents of Providence safe. Nothing else matters unless people feel safe. Raising taxes is not an option here in the city. The only way that we're going to get out of the mess that we find ourselves here in the city is by growing our tax base, by creating jobs, and turning around our economy here in the city.
We were all kind of firing at him, and I got into it with him. I just wanted to know if he understood what the money was and where it was going to come from. And he's been on this bender on federal grants, which I think has really been knocked down by Cianci pretty handily, don't you?
Well, there's two things on the federal grants. One, he's right that the federal grants went down between the early 2000s to about 2012. He's using a story that I reported. The problem is the current crop of police officers that are going to start in the next couple of weeks, they're paid for with federal funds. So you're going to have to figure that out in a couple of years.
But I see no fertile ground for additional federal grants for additional officers.
Yeah, it'll be very difficult.
And even then, the money diminishes usually.
Right, 3 years usually.
Yeah, it's meaning you get this much, then you get this much, then you get this much, and long term, unless you're going to let those guys go after you just hired them, you got to find a way to pay for them. Cianci had a thought too. He had a press conference a couple of days later, and this was a bit we played on the radio.
The police department budget is $69 million a year. Every cop is $50,000 plus benefits. So it's going to cost, if you add, it's going to cost, let me see, whatever the math is, $5 million, $6 million, $4 million, whatever it is. But I'll tell you something, whatever it takes is what we have to be prepared to spend.
All right, so he hasn't been a whole lot more specific about how to do it, other than to say, look, I promise you I'm not going to mess around with federal grants because that ship has sailed.
Right.
That's about as much as he's done.
Yeah, and he's basically saying, you heard him say, whatever it takes, right? I think there are people that really like to hear that. We don't care what we're going to do. 90% of people in the Channel 12 poll say they're concerned about crime. We're going to do anything to get it
And
there.
he said he was going to put a class in addition to the class that's in now, as soon as he gets in.
Right.
Lorza stepped back and said, my goal is 100 cops over 8 years if you keep me as mayor.
That's right. Yeah, Buddy's plan is actually similar to what Michael Solomon was proposing when he was running for mayor in the Democratic primary.
So talk to me now about Dan Harrop. This has been quite the little scene with Dan Harrop. Here's the two of them getting after each other at the debate.
I think as the young people discover that Mr. Cianci has a half-century history of recurrent, thuggish, criminal behavior, those numbers will change.
If you want to hear about Mr. Dr. Harrop's wonderful statements that he made about me, I commend you to read a book called Health versus Wealth. And it was written by Steve Anderson. Go to page 159, I believe, of that book, and you'll find out that Dr. Harrop was fined the company he worked with was fined $66,000 for putting profits before patient care. Here's what he did.
Yeah, well, that created a storm, did it not? Here is the quote from the book, by the way, and it's George Anders, not Steve Anderson, and he didn't even get the topic, the name of the book right, CNC did, but why worry about the details, right? So in there, it does talk about a fine the company that Harrop worked for had to pay in the mid-1990s. You know anything more about this?
You know, I haven't looked into much to it. I kind of chalked it up as back and forth on the debate stage.
But it has caused quite the harangue between the two. Harrop said this on the radio about it a day later.
He could have attacked my school plan, my right-to-work plan, a variety of plans I had. Instead, 3 minutes after his supposed apology for prior behavior, in which he invokes his dead daughter's name, he begins a slanderous attack against my career.
And again, I would say that was an equally crass remark in the way Dan Harrop handled that. But then he doubled down by saying this, and he was saying, look, you know, produce the check and I'll get out of the race. I kept laughing at this. If that's motive for Buddy Cianci to produce a check, Dan missed the boat because he needs Dan in the race.
That's right. Dan doesn't quite grasp that's or maybe he does, and he just is looking for a free press hit, which all candidates do. Dan Harrop's an interesting position at 6% in our poll. He's incredibly valuable to this race.
Right.
The problem is nobody quite knows who he draws from. Right. He's a part of the Republican in 2006 when he was the mayoral candidate. He got about 6,000 votes. 2010, John Scott, independent candidate against Angel Tavares, about 6,000 votes. Now we have another person in the race. Dan Harrop's not getting 6,000 votes. However, let's say he gets 2,000 votes. If he drops out of the race, it's possible that it's 1,000 each way, and it doesn't matter. But he's certainly getting a ton of pressure from the Elorza camp and from high-ranking Democrats in the city.
Still.
Absolutely.
out.
And he loves to play with it. I mean, there are days where I'll talk to him at 9 a.m. and he'll tell me, I'm still thinking about getting out of the race, and then he'll go on your show and say, no chance I'm getting out of the race.
I don't think he's credible. He is the wild card in this race, no doubt. When
Definitely
we come back, there's a super PAC, and then there's no super PAC. And I'm sure Buddy Cianci is thinking, that's pretty good. Stay with us. All right, welcome back in. Dan McGowan, my guest, WPRI.com. All things mayoral race right now. One of the things I think that Buddy Cianci, I'm sure, was having some sleepless nights over is this super PAC that was forming. You remember the email that finally came out? I mean, we knew about this prior, but this was Go Local Prov first got it, and then Dan got a hold of it. And this is a kind of what to do, how we're going to raise money from Lauren Adrian, the candidate who was a Democrat, then went independent, then said, I got to get out of the race to save America. Seems like he upset some people when this whole thing came out. They didn't like the way it came down, correct?
Well, yeah, I think they didn't like seeing their name, you get an email from somebody and then suddenly your name appears on a website. I think that's what they didn't like.
All right, so we got this headline from Dan's work after that thing went out. Okay, the Solomon campaign manager tapped to lead the CNC effort. You told me about that last time we were together. And then after this whole thing falls apart, here's the headline: the group collapses. What happened? Yeah,
so I think there's a key thing. A lot of people think it's they couldn't raise money. Everybody loves Buddy. It's not that. Those people could have absolutely put together enough money to fund this operation. The problem was they kind of ran out of time. They needed to do this, they should have been preparing this in July. They need to poll and do focus groups if they really want to have an impact.
So if they say the right thing.
Right, exactly, because who knows, maybe.
And the new thing, I mean, what were they going to say that everyone wasn't also already comfortable with?
That's exactly right. And so would the strategy be maybe to remind voters about things he did while he was mayor, raising taxes, the crime rate, which has been a little bit of an issue, or was it to just go after throw the kitchen sink at him
and be salacious with some of his real bad
transgressions or alleged
transgressions,
or
the assault thing?
Sure.
right?
And so what the problem is they never got to that point. They never figured out what would move the needle. And then, I started to hear whispers. Actually, when we were at that press conference on Friday together, I started to get some whispers that this thing was going to, fall apart, and sure enough, it did.
All right, so that independently funded thing ain't
Now,
happening.
to be clear, that doesn't mean that there won't be independent money spent in this race. Don't be surprised if you see a Mirth York, put her own money and just do whatever it takes. So I would say, don't be shocked if that happens.
And then let's just talk about the Journal's impact for a half a minute. Laura, why don't we just cut to that fourth graphic that you had there, if that's possible, just the editorial, his half-truths. And it seems like every other day we're getting one. Is it becoming white noise?
I think it still matters to sort of that older generation that does pick up the newspaper every day, and if it's just being beat into them constantly, I think it probably still matters. Certainly, you talked to Buddy Cianci. I talked to him a half an hour ago. He sees it every day, and he's not happy about it. So it certainly matters, at least to him. Does it appear like they're targeting him? Sure. It seems very clear that the editorial board is targeting Buddy Cianci right now.
We are 4 weeks away. Anybody's guess, right?
I think it's as close as, the primary was the closest race, and I think this one will be the closest race.
All right. Stay in touch.
Good times.
WPRI.com, Dan McGowan, read him. Your State of Mind when we come back. Stay with us. Your state of mind is important to us. This is how you get in touch. 228-1886 is the number. The email is stateofmind@myiritv.com. Facebook post, tweet at us. What do we have in the voicemail bag today?
The problem with this state is most of the politicians are crooks. We know it. They know it. And it's time for change. We should put term limits on everybody.
That's pretty deep, Dave. You know what? Maybe. I don't even know what to say, because that's all you people say, term limits. I'll see you tomorrow on the radio at noon. Bye.